So, hello and welcome back. And in this part, I've decided to talk a bit about shading. And the reason for that is, as you can see, where I'm at this point with this portrait, is that I like how it's progressing. I've got a nice expression here. She looks happy, the smile seems genuine, and there is adequate resemblance, but the drawing is quite messy and not refined. And the reason for that is that I intentionally used a much more relaxed, less precise, less accurate approach for this drawing than the first drawing for which I recorded the drawing process. And the reason for that is that I wanted to show you that it can be done this way as well, and that you can accept a less than perfect sketch and then improve and refine that as you go. So I want to spend some time on shading here, and of course that's going to make this drawing look much more professional and refined. And the question you can ask yourself always is, how much of the shading do I really need? And of course it depends on how much time you have available, how much time you want to devote to your drawing, because the best way to do this is to add the shading slowly and progressively and in as many layers as you can, and then at some point you just feel that it's done. The second question is, how do I determine where to put the shading and what parts of the face to shade? And of course you can base that mostly on the reference photo, and there are of course differences, and some parts are evidently darker than others, and there is this approach called blocking, which means that you would put a light outline around some of the parts that need to be darker and then shade that. I do not use this approach. I just use this approach where I add shading where I think is necessary based on the reference photo and based on some of the things I've learned along about the anatomy. But some of these areas are evidently darker, but in others there is a slight subtle difference, and it takes a while to start noticing those slight and subtle differences. But if you are just starting with this, what you can do is turn your photo into a black and white photo, and then it is much easier to see the differences and to copy them with graphite. And while you're there, you might as well increase the contrast, and then it becomes even easier. You see that there are these areas around the mouth that show these subtle differences in tone, and they do in fact make the smile look warmer, because they represent the tiny ripples that her mouth have while she is smiling. So the smile is not only in her lips, it is also in these muscles around her mouth, and this is this is something that you can see while you're learning anatomy, but it's quite difficult because it reflects differently in every particular person. So these tiny differences in tone might be the best way to do it. So the third issue about shading is the actual technique. So I use two. The first one is cross contour lines, which means that I'm shading in lines, relatively short lines, but I make sure that they curve along the surface, the curved surface that I'm drawing, and they allow you to make the surface appear convex, so protruding towards the viewer, or concave, like an moving away from the viewer. And it depends of course on how the viewer's brain is going to interpret it, but it does give a nice third dimension. So using cross contour lines that follow the curve is a good approach if you have these convex parts like the cheeks, or the concave parts like the part underneath her lower lip, for example, and these parts particularly around her mouth right here. So the other approach I use is simply to add value, which means to darken the areas by moving the pencil in really short strokes and simply adding graphite on top of graphite, which you can see here. And I do that mostly on the parts that do not have the noticeable curve. So it is just graphite, so you can always erase, and I like this eraser that's shaped like a pencil. It can also be used for some blending, although I do not blend a lot. I said I like my drawings to look like drawings and not photographs. So thank you for watching, and see you in the next and the final part.